Welcome, everyone. I'm live here with Dr. Jose Ramos, and we are going to dive into his contribution to the Journal of Future Studies, reimagining politics after the election of Trump. And Dr. Ramos, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, Heather.
Yeah.
Great to be able to talk about this.
Sure. And your contribution to this special symposium for JFS is entitled Donald Trump and the Birth of Planetary Culture. And I just wanted you to give us a kind of what drove you to write this article and just a little bit of your feeling for the direction of this article.
Yeah, look, it really came out of a sense of, first of all, despair. You know, after Trump won, just a big sense of despondency, and especially when it hit me, you know, that he wanted to drop the Paris Accords and the climate crisis that we're facing. I think it really hit me hard, especially, you know, as a parent, you know, thinking about the future of my children and the future of everyone's children. So, so really, it was an attempt to regain agency in the face of what felt like these overwhelming structures of change. And the mode of regaining agency is to do a good diagnosis and to use what I know, which is future studies and foresight, as a way to diagnose the issue. And we can only really get leverage on something if we do a good, solid diagnosis first, and we get some clear insights into the nature of the issue to begin with. And from there, then we can say, okay, well, then what can we do? So that's really where it came from.
Sure, that's great. In your article, you talk about some of these insights that you were exploring, and you mentioned that you saw Trump as a milestone, moving from the empire to a pluralist planetary culture. And you draw upon this idea of the pluralist planetary culture throughout your entire paper. Could you talk a little bit about what that means, where you're drawing that from, and how that shapes your paper?
Yeah, you know, the world is becoming more and more cosmopolitan, especially the big cities around the world. They have more of a global outlook. People are becoming more aware that they are part of a planet. The climate crisis tells us we're part of a planet. The cosmopolitan nature of our cities, the way that our trade works, even our Facebook accounts in which we're now connecting with people around the world. So in certain parts of the planetary polity, there's an awareness of being part of this planetary thing, and not only its necessities, you know, like addressing our big challenges, but also just the fun things, like where do I get my movies, where do I get my video games, that sort of thing. So, you know, we basically are shifting from a nation-state oriented identity towards an identity that has to encompass more than that. You know, nations cannot simply solve the problems of the modern age. They have to work together. People have to work together from many ethnicities, across many nationalities. It takes cooperation. So there really isn't there's no going back to the kind of nostalgic days of the nation state and being able to solve our planetary problems. It simply is not going to happen. At the same time, there's always counterbalancing reactions to major social changes, and those are really to be expected and to be understood, so that we can manage the changes better.
Great, thank you. Also, I just wanted to touch on, not only did you talk a lot about the pluralist planetary culture, but you moved also into some methodological approaches, looking at 4 different possibilities. And I, from the paper I got from a little bit that you're talking about, these might be some of the things that are disowned or that are being maybe needing some reevaluation of how we're reacting to them as a society. Could you talk a little bit about those 4 different pillars that you discussed in the paper?
Yeah, no problem. So I essentially use a combination of Sohail Inayatullah's 6 pillars and the work of William Irwin Thompson to look at 4 futures. The first future is the youth future. That's the future that may have worked 50 years ago or 40 years ago, but it's really out of date now. The second future is what's I term the dominant vision, which is what is the vision which guides development, guides our societies today, or has been dominant up until the present. And then there's the disowned future. The disowned future is a future that's been pushed away, that's been repressed, or that's been marginalized. And then the final one is the integrated future. And the integrated future takes all of the repressed or the sidelined, marginalized future, and it integrates it into the dominant. So instead of, and that's basically what we would call shadow work on the shadows of our society. If we have certain social problems or social issues that are pushed away by the media or by the elite or the dominant parts of society, then we're actually able to work on them. So to quickly talk you through how that works in the paper, the youth future is Trump's desire to come back to kind of like life in the 1950s, when there were coal mines and there was full employment, and the United States was the most powerful country in the world by far, and it was a predominantly quote unquote white society with very low sort of you might call multiculturalism. And not a lot of hybridity. Maybe quote unquote white kids were not listening to rap. They were listening to quote unquote white music, or so there was a sense that everyone had their place. So that's sort of the youth future. And in a way, Trump wants to kind of get back to that, wants to get back to a feeling that we're safe. We're safe in this, in Heartland USA. We've got jobs. We're not being overwhelmed by migrants. And who we are is white. There's there's kind of a desire for an essentialism, for an essential self, an essential ethnic self that's not going to be it's not going to intermingle with too many other elements and lose its essence, and so that kind of goes back to the way in which so-called miscegenation was illegal in the history of the United States. The policy that a black man and a white woman, or a white man and a black woman couldn't get married in many states in the United States. So anyways, that's sort of the youth future. The dominant vision has been what I call neoliberal empire. And what neoliberal empire is, it's an extension of what the United States was founded upon. The United States is different from other European nation states in the sense that European nation states were constructed around ethnicities. Those ethnicities weren't necessarily completely natural ethnicities. Big differences between Catalan and Castile, for example, in Spain. There are big differences between London and Manchester. But still, there was a sense that there's this single language that we're going to construct, that got constructed over the 19th century and 20th century. There's a single community that we're going to construct. We're this ethnic group, generally speaking. with differences, and that's the basis of the nation state. And if you look around the world, most nation states are founded on the concept of, ethnic similarities, ethnic consistency. If you look at Japan, of course, great differences between, Hokkaido and Kyushu, but at the same time, constructing a sense of Japaneseness, and this is what it means to be Japanese. And so most countries sort of follow that pattern. And you can even see with China, for example, China constructed the idea of the 7 tribes, which is a concept from Sun Yat-sen, the founder of China, because he was trying to construct Chinese nationhood. And in order to do that, he needed to conceptualize what a broader identity was. And that broader identity was to include the Han as one of 7 other tribes, including the Manchurians and other very dominant groups, or not so dominant groups in China. But again, constructing a kind of sense of ethnic consistency, a kind of consistent identity. Now, the difference with the United States is that it followed a different track. William Irwin Thompson basically says that there's 2 modes of empire. One mode of empire he calls the Persian mode. And the Persian mode of empire means that a particular ethnic group come to dominate a particular region, and they subordinate other ethnic groups. And those other ethnic groups don't participate fully in the life of that empire. They are, in a sense, they're, vassals of the state, of the state. They're subjects of the state. They have less rights and less responsibilities. And the dominant ethnic group that controls that empire holds the power. You might think of that like the Turkish Empire or other empires. He contrasts that with the Roman Empire. Roman Empire incorporated regions and enfranchised the people of those regions as citizens of the state, in a sense mobilizing them as constituent parts of the empire to renew the empire itself. And from the beginning of the United States, in a completely different origin from the Roman, by the way, there's some comparisons that you can make, but others that are completely different. It was already quite pluralistic from the beginning. It had Dutch, it had Germans, it had English, it had just about everyone who could get there from Europe, from Western Europe there. And so you couldn't naturally just, develop this sense of ethnic identity. And there were lots of debates, is it going to be English? It's going to be German. That's our national language, this and that, throughout time. But from the beginning, there was a sense that the United States is fundamentally pluralistic, and it has to play by pluralistic rules. So the ethno-nationalism that's more typical of the European states simply doesn't work within the American context, which I would call empire, drawing from the sort of experience of Rome and what the framers of the Constitution drew from classical political thought into developing this new sort of system. And the system is quite incorporative. It conquered regions, it conquered the middle, it purchased, there was the Louisiana Purchase, there was the Mexican-American War, and it was conquest but incorporative, bringing people into that, the fold of citizenship. And you can see that in the incredible diversity of the political leaders in Washington as well. If you look at the Congress, there's African American and Mexican American and Asian American people who are representatives of their regions. So that's a particular. It's a very important thing to think about when you think about the trajectory of the United States. So when I talk about the dominant vision, I call it neoliberal empire. The empire is really the empire part is the legacy of how the United States was formed to begin with, is that it was pluralist from the beginning, pluralist around a Christian sense. It was pluralist around, we might be Dutch or German or English or French, but we're still Christian, and we're quote unquote, we're not the heathens, right? So that's how the United States sort of originally framed pluralism. But as the United States expanded and incorporated new regions, and migrants came in from different parts of the world, then that pluralism deepened, and that sense of empire also deepens. That it cannot be a place for just one ethnic group to frame how life should be lived and who should be let in and who should not be let in.
Sure.
So the neoliberal part of that is that since the 1970s, the United States has incorporated new regions of the world, and this is really not just the United States. It's really part of the post-Bretton Woods system, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and a number of other of the treaties that created a global market system, but began incorporating people into the dominant Western economic system, and which began to drive new industries, such as the IT industry and other industries. And so when you look at a state like California, a very successful state, at technology, it's underpinned by a huge amount of pluralism, and that pluralism is to the advantage of the wealth creating potentials within that state itself. So neoliberal empire is also it's the modern manifestation of empire. Now, what gets pushed away in that? So this takes us to the third future, which is the disowned future. Who's disowned? Well, neoliberal empire disowns heartland America. It disowns heartland USA from the point of view of, letting manufacturing go to China, go to Taiwan, go to Japan. So, heartland USA was disowned from the point of view of, fairly well-paying jobs, manufacturing. The jobs are now in Silicon Valley, or they're in the gaming industry in Los Angeles or whatnot, or they're in the financial districts of New York, but heartland USA is lost. What else gets disowned? The need to protect the environment. Neoliberalism is a profit-making system, but it's not a earth-protecting system. So that gets disowned as well. So that's why you had the battle in Seattle in 2001. The trade unions were there together with the Greens, together with Friends of the Earth and World Wildlife Federation, to protest against the shadow of globalization, of that neoliberal globalization. But Clinton went in there. He's a smooth guy. He gave everyone a hug. We care about you. And then he just kept on going with NAFTA. So, NAFTA created all kinds of environmental problems, all kinds of social problems, and it displaced a lot of jobs. So that shadow of globalization has been around for a long time, a very long time in the United States. You could look at the battle in Seattle as really the first eruption of discontent, but that eruption of discontent was at a very early phase, and you still had Teamsters and Turtles together, but at the same time, it wasn't taken seriously by most of the country. And so that shadow of globalization, that shadow of that disowned future, which is still Heartland USA plus the environment, has now morphed into the Trump supporter base, essentially, who have this visceral and irrational reaction against the quote-unquote establishment, essentially throwing the baby out with the bathwater, saying, well, screw that, we want to go back to the 1950s, so, and Trump offers that sort of fantasy return. So then the integrated future, which is the fourth future, is really saying you have to take on board all those shadow sides. You got to say what has been disowned. If change is too fast, then people need some sense of security and community. If you've lost your Heartland USA jobs, well, we have to really, think about how we do that, and we got to take that seriously. If you feel like you need to have your ethnic group and solidarity, that's good. Have your ethnic group and have your solidarity. That doesn't have to be to the exclusion of other ethnic groups. You can be quote unquote white if that's what you believe that you are. We would never stop African American person or a Mexican American person from saying you can't be Mexican, and you can't be African American, or you can't be Asian. You can't hang around with your people. That's kind of absurd. So there's a particular. So we have to be able to integrate the shadow, the disown, with the dominant vision, and say, okay, well, if we are going to do a new form of, if we are going to continue this empire project, how do we make it an empire project that is actually dealing with the harsher sides and the shadow sides of its manifestations? And so that's really what that last future is about. And that's where the planetary culture comes in, because the central argument is that we can construct, and it's still, it's really a question of, there's a lot of forces at play, but we need to be able to construct a way in which people can be part of the global polity, but also be protected in that global polity. So we need to have a way in which people can keep their jobs, that are not being displaced by too many technological changes or too many other types of changes, that there are protections, but we can still construct this world, this planetary system where we can draw from each other's strengths and draw from each other's diversity.
Yeah, that's great. I think that you did a great job of really laying out the arguments and the methodology that you used in the paper. I hope everyone goes to jfsdigital.org and find your paper under our special symposium, Reimagining Politics After the Election of Trump. And just to kind of pull everything together, so to go maybe a step further from your paper, could you maybe give a little bit of insight in how we can envision the long-term future from here forward?
Yeah, so the basic idea is that if we have a particular group that is driving change and driving progress, we're gonna get natural reactions to that. We're gonna get reactionaries. The neoliberal project has created reactionaries. It drives reaction. Liberalism in its purest form is complete equality under the law, as long as we don't harm another person. But what that implies is the eventual dismantling of all traditions, or many of the traditions that we feel we have, come from, Christmas or Hanukkah or, Ramadan or whatever. And so there's a disownment that happens in liberalism. And, liberals tend to be pretty blind about it, because there's a sense that we're the educated people, we're the ones who read the news, and the rest of them are just a bunch of idiots. But I actually think that we have to look at the whole system and the various movements in that system, and understand that the people who are reacting are also part of the system. They're part of the complex that we have created. So if we're driving for changes to marital laws, if we're driving towards changes to the economy, it's more high tech and it's more based on the gig economy, then there's displacement somewhere else. We have to take that whole system on board. So I actually think it's not an easy answer, but it requires us to move to basically a higher level of thinking, where we can say, okay, if you're a Christian fundamentalist and you just absolutely want to be that, you have the right to be that. You can be that. Now, we don't want you to dictate all of policy for the United States, but we want to find an ecosystem in which you can play your role in the diversity of the world. And then I, as whoever I am, can play my role in the diversity of the world. So instead of trying to impose my view and my political template on the rest of the country and on you, or you on the rest of the country and on me, we actually have to be able to construct what might be understood as an ecosystem of diversity among people, and ultimately find ways in which all of us contribute to the commons, even though we're incredibly different. Like the bee and the flower are radically different species, and at the same time, they contribute to the wholeness of the ecosystem. The bee can't survive without the flower, and the flower can't survive without the bee. So I think we have to understand, and I think it's a stretch of the imagination to think that, you know, the liberal can't survive without the fundamentalist, and the fundamentalist can't survive without the liberal. You know, it's like, does that make any sense? And that's really what this is about. I think it's about getting to a different place of imagination and thinking about how we construct national polities, imperial polities, and global polities going into the future.
I think that's great. Thank you so much, Jose. I'm Heather Fry with JFS Digital, and this is Dr. Jose Ramos, also with JFS. And that's what we have for you today. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.